Well, about 3 weeks ago, probably 3 or 4 weeks ago, it's about 9:30 at night, I made the ever-important run to Hudson's before it closed to pick up some tater tots. For those of you who don't understand why tater tots are important at 9:30 at night, I just can't even talk to you. I went in, grabbed the tater tots, got back out to the car. My keys were right where I left them in the ignition with the doors locked. I called my neighbor. Where's Bonnie? Bonnie knows this has been Bonnie Hirsch, she knows this has been an ongoing thing with me here lately. I called my neighbor, good Jim Johnson, at 9:30 at night. He was so happy to hear from me. He came and he got me and took me home. I appreciate that still. When I got in the car, I said, Jim, I'm losing my mind. I've never locked my keys in my car, period. In the past year, I've done it 4 times. And he said, you're not losing your mind. You have 3 little kids, man. They'll do it to you. And he would know, and he was right. This morning, I came and I taught the high school and junior high class. That was good. I told them, hey, I'm going to run downstairs a few minutes early. We're going to get class over just a few minutes early. So I grabbed my Bible, started thumbing through to pull my sermon out of my Bible, and guess what? Yeah. It's sitting in my other Bible where I was reading at the kitchen table while the kids were eating, and I'm reading. I'm losing it. I was talking to my mom a couple weeks ago, and I said, I'm locking my keys in my car. I'm leaving things places, setting them down, not knowing where to pick it up. I said, I just don't know what's going on with me. She goes, well, Beau, you have 3 kids, you're busy, your mind is at places, these kind of things, And I said, let me guess, Mom, it's going to get worse before it gets better. And she goes, oh no, it only gets worse. That's true. My mom has what we call the honest approach to parenting. She was right. For those of you who are visiting and don't know, what we're doing this year, we started as a congregation to read through the Bible in a year, and we're using a chronological plan. And so we're just reading, kind of plugging right through. It is unbelievable we're here at the end of May. I mean, it is unbelievable. Now, I like to get my Bible, and I like to look at all the pages we've read, and we have read a hunk. I mean, we are getting near to being halfway through the Bible. And so what Steve or I have been doing every Sunday is that we are preaching out of that week's reading. So this Sunday leaves us with Solomon. David had just died, and his son Solomon takes the throne. The first thing that we read about Monday morning or evening, whenever you do your reading, the first thing that we read was that all of Solomon's enemies, or enemies to the throne, let's call them David's leftover enemies, people who wanted the throne, were all pretty well put to death for one reason or another. And so Solomon, now this young man, takes the throne, and all of the enemies, the kingdom is at rest, and it is blessed, and it's really a pretty good time. But if you have your Bibles, turn to 1 Kings. And we'll start in chapter 3 this morning. Because a very familiar thing, something that you all already know, we're about to read and talk about. But if we think about it, it's really pretty fascinating. But let's start reading first. In 1 Kings chapter 3. And we'll start in verse 4. It says, the king went to Gibeon to offer sacrifices for that was the most important high place. And Solomon offered 1,000 burnt offerings on the altar. At Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon during the night in a dream, and God said, ask for whatever you want me to give you. Haven't we all thought about hearing those words? Solomon answered, you have shown great kindness to your servant, my father David, because he was faithful to you and righteous and upright in heart. You have continued this great kindness to him and have given him a son to sit on his throne to this very day. Now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David, but I am only a child and do not know how to carry out my duties. Your servant is here among the people you have chosen, a great people, too numerous to count or number. So give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong. For who is able to govern this great people of yours?" The Lord was pleased that Solomon had asked for this. So God said to him, "Since you have asked for this, and not for long life or wealth for yourself, nor have you asked for the death of your enemies, but for discernment in administering justice, I will do what you have asked. I will give you a wise and discerning heart, so that there will never have been anyone like you, nor will there ever be. Moreover, I will give you what you have not asked for, both riches and honor, so that in your lifetime you will have no equal among kings. And if you walk in my ways and obey my statutes and commands as David your father did, I will give you long life." Then Solomon awoke, and he realized it had been a dream. Now I want you to think about this for just a second. First, from the perspective of who Solomon is. Think about a young man who is now king. Think about how that would inflate a person. You know what I'm saying? How that would give somebody, he is an important person at a young age, but how that would create arrogance and pride and a "I'm better than you" attitude, because he's the king. And he receives this at a very young age. The other thing is, it's thought that he was probably around 20 years old whenever he took the throne. Now, I can tell you this. Maybe you were this way too. Whenever I was 20 years old, probably the very worst thing you could have called me was a kid, because I was an adult. Hey, I could vote. I'm living out there on my own. Right? There's nothing worse than being 20 and somebody calling you a kid. You know? Nobody thinks that way. You don't want to be a kid. But look at Solomon. What's amazing, whenever God asked him this, "Hey, I'll give you whatever you want," look what the first thing that he says is, "I am only a child, 20 years old, king. I'm only a child. And I need help. I want to be able to discern rightly to lead your people who are great." It's pretty impressive. It's really impressive, actually. Go back to your minds. I've already established I can hardly remember being 20, but go back to your minds when you were 20 or in that neighborhood. And think if somebody came to you and they ask you this question: "Whatever you ask, I'll give to you." It's the ultimate genie in a bottle. I don't know what else to call it. It's that genie in a bottle wish. It's the one that even as older people we still think about. Boy, if I could have one thing, if I just had this. And this kid, this 20-year-old, for those of you who are 20, I apologize, you're very mature. But this kid is given this wish by God. Whatever you want, just ask. Just ask. I'll give it to you. This past Wednesday night, I was sitting back there by Joni, and I was thinking about this, and I said, "Joni, think about whenever we were 20, if God would have said to you, you can have whatever you want." She goes, "Oh." I would like to think I would have still been in the picture, but anyway. Then I said, think about it now. I'm 36, she's 30. Think about it now. What if God right now said, "You can have whatever you ask for, one thing. You can have whatever you want, one thing." Think about that, right where you sit. We all go to that pageant place in our mind. "Well, I thank you for asking me whatever I would like. I would like to have world peace. I want to end hunger and starvation throughout the world. I want to heal AIDS. I want to find the cure for cancer." Phooey. That's not the way our minds work, is it? Just once, wouldn't you love to hear a Christian person is one of those things, get up and say, you know what, I wish everybody in the world, if I could have one thing, everybody in the world would be faithful to the Lord. Man, they would just be faithful. The whole world would serve the Lord, starting now. Wouldn't that be cool? Bet you they'd lose. But think about that one magical wish. Anything you like. I'm so impressed with Solomon. Because what he asked for is discernment and a heart to know and to rightly lead the people. He asked for wisdom. And we know God grants it and gives it to him. But I'll tell you this, Solomon was wise for his age to ask for that. At 20, it doesn't cross my mind. At 20, I can't spell wisdom. But that's what Solomon asked for. What's cool about God is God says, you know what? I'm impressed with you, Solomon. This is good. This is good. I'm going to give it to you. And not even just a little. You're going to be so wise that there will never be another person like you. Nobody has ever lived who is like you, and never will somebody else live to be as wise as you. Think about that. Pretty cool. But he said, because you asked for that, I'm going to give you everything else. Wealth, health, all of it. It's yours. He gives it to him. Let's spend the next few moments talking about wisdom. So grab your Bibles and turn to James. Just flip a page to chapter 4 first. 1 Kings chapter 4. If you look in verse 29, it says, God gave Solomon wisdom and great insight and the breadth of understanding as measureless as the sand on the seashore. Pretty good. Solomon's wisdom was greater than the wisdom of all the men of the East and greater than all the wisdom of Egypt. He was wiser than any other man, including Ethan the Ezrahite, wiser than Heman, Calcol, and Darda, and the sons of Mahal. Hey, I'm telling you, that's pretty cool to get the honorable mention in the wisdom list, but apparently Solomon was heads above them all. And his fame spread through all the surrounding nations. He spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs numbered 1,005. He described plant life from the cedar of Lebanon to the hyssop that grows out of the walls. He also taught about animals and birds and reptiles and fish. Men of all nations came to listen to Solomon, sent by all the kings of the world who had heard of his wisdom. So Solomon became great in the world because God gave him wisdom and discernment and knowledge, obviously, of all things. Not only was he this great wise judge and leader, he was also the world's best science teacher. So flip over now to James. Let's look. And when I started reading Monday, one of the first things that I wrote down was, what does the Bible say about wisdom? And let me tell you, we don't have time to scratch the surface. So we're just going to look at this passage in James. Because the Bible is full of talk about wisdom. Look in James chapter 3. James writes this. Who is wise? James 3:13. Who is wise and understanding among you? Let him show it by his good life, by deeds done in humility that come from wisdom. But if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come down from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual, of the devil. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice. But the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. We get the idea here that there are two kinds of wisdom. And that's true. There's godly wisdom, wisdom that comes from heaven, and then there's earthly wisdom. Now, the thing that is the greatest distinguisher between the two, as far as I can see, is motive. And we'll look at that more in just a second, but we'll look at the motive, the thing that drives the two type of wisdom. But before we do, as we look at wisdom, wisdom is really how knowledge and understanding play out in our lives. In that first verse, it says, "Who is wise and understanding among you? Let him show it by his good life, by deeds done in humility." So wisdom is knowledge and understanding in this heart to do right as it is played out in our lives. Wisdom is properly putting knowledge and understanding to use. But what I notice as I look down through here is that true, godly, heavenly wisdom is born out of humility. You can't be truly wise as God would have us be and be proud or arrogant. True godly wisdom is born out of humility. And that's because true godly wisdom puts others ahead of ourselves. Think about Solomon for just a second. Yeah, he received what he wished for. But what he wished for, his wisdom and that heart, wasn't so that he would be the greatest person that ever lived. It was so that he would rightly be able to lead God's people. You see, what he asked for was selfless. He said, "I'm a child. I'm in over my head. I have no idea what to do. Lord, I need help. Why don't you strike up some wisdom so I can lead your people?" See, it was a selfless thing that he requested. And that's the key to godly wisdom. It is based in humility. Now look at this. Earthly wisdom, verse 14. "If you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your heart, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come down from heaven, but is earthly. It's unspiritual. It's of the devil." When I say selfish, who comes to mind? Satan ought to be pretty high up there. His selfishness, his conceit, his arrogance. It's landed him where he is now. It's going to land him in eternity. The punishment he will receive forever is his conceit. And this says, hey, wisdom that is based in bitter envy, selfish ambition, trying to better your position, who you are, your kind of things that is inward focused, that's not heavenly. It's of the devil. So earthly wisdom is based in selfishness. It says, "For where you have envy and selfish ambition, you'll find disorder in every evil practice." Because that's people will do whatever they can do to get ahead, to self-promote, to be at the top. So you find selfish ambition and envy. Now listen to this. Wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure. It's peace-loving. It's considerate. It's submissive. Boy, that's an ugly word, isn't it? Submissive. Full of mercy and good fruit. It's impartial and sincere. I circled that in my Bible, and I have a little line and an arrow drawn back up to the word humility a few verses ahead of it. Because whenever you think about being pure and peace-loving and considerate, considering other people, being submissive, what's more humbling than being submissive to authority? To being full of mercy. To be full of mercy, you have to be what first? Humble. And to live good fruit and to be impartial and sincere. To be impartial says that I'm not going to judge on my behalf. I'm going to put others ahead of me. I'm going to be sincere. I'm going to be impartial. It's being selfless. So really, whenever we look at wisdom, earthly wisdom and godly wisdom, it's pretty easy to distinguish between the two. Earthly wisdom is always based on my betterment. It's selfish. It's based on me. Godly wisdom is always going to be humble. And it's going to be based on God and who He is. And the fruits of the Spirit are what are born out of that type of life. I tell you what, never has it been so easy to discern between two types of wisdom as it is in our world. Can't you look at society and think, man, it's pretty easy to see that earthly wisdom and God's wisdom couldn't be in any more contrast than they are? Because we live in a culture of self-betterment, of me first, of self-promotion, of I deserve this. That's why whenever I was 20, and probably even now, if I was asked that magical question, I would say, well, you know what, Lord, $1 billion wouldn't hurt. I could cure about anything with $1 billion. Used to be $1 million, but we're up to the B's these days, right? Based in selfishness. It's easy to discern between the two. As followers of Christ, we're to be different. I want you to think about your life for a second. Just think about your life for a second. Which one of those verses describes who you are? Do you make your decisions for you and for your family based out of bitter envy? Out of selfish ambition? Or do you make decisions for you and your family based out of purity and being peace-loving and in consideration for other people and being submissive to other people, to being full of mercy, to bearing good fruit in your life, to being impartial, to being sincere? Weigh your life for a second. Which one of those two describes the way that you live your life? The answer to that question tells you whether you're wise with an earthly wisdom or a wisdom that comes from God. There's too much in the Bible to talk about concerning wisdom. Think back to the first chapter of Corinthians. We don't have time for all of this, but think back to the first chapter of Corinthians where it talks about the Jews, and it says that the cross is a stumbling block for the Jews, right? You remember that? And it's foolishness for the Gentiles. It's because these Jews who were looking for the return of the kingdom of David, who were looking for a return back to the glory days, they were looking for a Savior to come and to lead them, to kill the Romans and to take back over and let's reestablish the temple. Let's get this done. And what they got was Jesus who died on a cross, which was a curse. That's a stumbling block for somebody looking for a mighty warrior. It's foolishness to the Gentiles. Because Jesus didn't live according to what success in the world is or was thought to be. He wasn't the leader they were looking for because they were looking for earthly success. Think back to Philippians 2 for just a second. In that, starting around verse 2, 3, somewhere in that neighborhood, the Christ hymn there. Christ who did not consider equality with God to be something to be attained, so he lowered himself. Remember this one? Not only did he lower himself in the flesh to be a human, but he lowered himself to be a servant, and he lowered himself to death, and not just death, but death on a cross, which was a curse. And because he humbled himself, Jesus humbled himself, key word there, to death, even death on a cross, God exalted him to the highest place, gave him a name above all names, the name at which every knee will bow. Think about that. To those who don't believe, the message of Jesus is foolishness. It's the dumbest thing you've ever heard. You're telling me that this great Savior, the one who came and who saved the world and supposedly has eternity set up for us, was allowed to be killed? Really by his own people and hung on a cross? Not a great battle plan. Especially where earthly wisdom and selfish ambition and these things are applied, it doesn't make sense. But whenever you apply earthly wisdom or heavenly wisdom, godly wisdom. And see that in humility, he lowered himself as low as he can go so that God then exalted him above all others. Think about Solomon for a second. He doesn't ask to be better than everybody. He just asks for wisdom and discernment just so he can lead the people of God as a young man. Just, Lord, give me wisdom so I can lead. And God said, okay, you've humbled yourself here. You've asked for a good thing. Because of that, you're going to be exalted. Never will there be another man who will have wisdom as you have wisdom, now or forever. There will not be another king on earth that has the wealth that you have or the understanding that you have. So God exalted him above all others. Let's flip back to 1 Kings real quick. Because there's a good example, and we won't read it. If you turn back to 1 Kings, immediately after what we had just read, starting in chapter 3, verse 16, says there's a wise, the subtitle there is a wise ruling, and it's something that we know. But I want us to think about this for a second. You know the story. Two prostitutes, they come, they both have a baby. They come and they sit before Solomon, and they say, they have one baby, and they tell the king, we both had an infant baby. We both live in the house. One night, we go to sleep. While we were sleeping, one lays on top of her baby and suffocates it, and the baby dies. The other one's sleeping with her baby. The mother wakes up in the middle of the night, realizes that her baby is dead. So in her mind, she devises really a pretty good plan, if you think about it. From an earthly standpoint, pretty good plan. It's based in selfish ambition, though, and it's based in envy of what the other lady had, which was a baby that was alive still. But this wise earthly plan, she goes and she takes her dead baby, she places it with the other woman. She takes the living baby and she takes it and goes back to bed. When they wake up in the morning, it says, and whenever it got light enough so that the mother could see, she looked down and she realized that the baby was dead, but it wasn't her baby, right? We remember this one from Bible school. Wasn't her baby. So now they come to Solomon so that he can discern between the two of them who is the true mother of this child. And they listen. Do you remember this? Solomon says, bring me a sword. That's an attention grabber, by the way. Give me a sword. Let's cut this thing in half. One mom says, do it. If I can't have a baby, she can't have the baby either. Cut the baby in half and let's go on our way. The other one says, let her have it. Now let me tell you, moms, for you to give up a child so that it can live takes a very big dose of humility. Don't you know she had to choke down some serious anger as she was sitting there? Somebody had stolen her baby. She was mad. She had been upset, frustrated. Rage comes to mind. I've seen people mess with mama's babies. So Joni says, you don't mess with Mama Bear. But she chokes all of that down and humbly says, you know what? She can have the baby. Solomon says, I think we found our mama. And he gives the baby back to the rightful mother. Look, I'm telling you, as far as earthly self-promotion and all that kind of goes, and selfish ambition, having the baby and all, the other lady had a great plan. I mean, it was an accident. Her baby died. She wanted the baby. It's a good plan. She gets a baby still. She'll just swap out the babies. Nobody will ever know. It'll be my word against hers. Had it worked, that would have been a genius plan, wouldn't it? In the earth's eyes. I mean, it was a good plan. But it was selfish. It was worldly. It was sinful. It was of the devil. Solomon rightly divided. Flip back to James chapter 1, and we'll be done here. James chapter 1. I just want to tell you this real quick. I'll talk nice about him because he lives like 5 hours away. My brother-in-law, Todd, that's Joni's oldest brother, He's one of those quiet people, the kind of person that makes me nervous, frankly. He doesn't talk a lot. I like people that talk, obviously. But he's quiet. He doesn't say much, ever. He's brilliant. And he's a very good people person. He just chooses not to say a lot. Had a conversation with Todd a couple years ago, and we were actually talking about this. We were talking about wisdom. And Todd, I know nobody since Solomon has ever been there, but there was a list of some honorable mention there. I would put Todd in honorable mention. I really would. And Todd, we were asking about that and said, me and Joni's other brother, we're like best buddies. He's just like me. We're like talking and punching in the arm, you know. And Todd tolerates us. But we were talking about wisdom and the attainment of it and how we get it and how we discern so rightly, because Todd is the place that the family goes when we need wisdom. And most of you know LaVon, and you know that her first husband was killed by a drunk driver. When that happened, Todd was 5 years old. And as I read this week, I thought about Todd all week, because at the age of 5, Todd has told me he just felt this burden of responsibility for his family. He knew he was 5 years old, kindergarten. It's Grant. But he knew he was now the man of the house in his mind. And he knew he had to help and to provide for his family. He said, there's only one prayer I've ever prayed every day of my life since I was 5 years old. One. Every day of his life. He's 44-ish, 5-ish. Since he was 5 years old. Lord, give me wisdom. He still prays it every day. James chapter 1, verse 5 says, if any of you lacks wisdom, he should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to him. Earthly or godly wisdom. Godly wisdom is something to be desired. And all we have to do to get it is ask. Just like Todd, just like Solomon. We just have to ask. If you need your church this morning, please come while we stand and sing.